What's up, fam? Welcome back to the Steep Stuff Podcast. I'm your host, James Lariello, and I am so excited to bring you guys today's episode. Boulderite Flannery Davis Love is finally on the podcast. I'm so excited we were able to bring this conversation to you guys. Flannery, for those of you who do not know, is a two-time Longs Peak FKT holder. She did it in the same year. Someone took her record. She went back and got it, creating the lure of what legends are made of. On top of that, she qualified in 2024 for the U.S. Olympic Trials Marathon and raced at the Olympic Trials in Orlando, Florida. On top of that, she raced and qualified in the top, or ran into the top 10 at the U.S. Mountain Running Championships at Snowbird, Cirque Surrey Snowbird. And as if she couldn't have done more, she also ran top 10 at the Pikes Peak Marathon, which I know she still has some unfinished business with. So we'll hope to bring her back to that race. Flannery is an amazing human. She has a really cool job as well. She comes from a different background as a soccer player, which I thought was very unique. I myself coming from a background of soccer, which is a little bit more non-traditional. It's a great conversation. It's very uplifting, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. So without further ado, none other than Flannery Davis Love.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live.
People, Earth, listen up. The Steep Stuff Podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Direction USA. I am so excited to be partnering with Ultimate Direction in 2025 as the official hydration solutions partner for the Steep Stuff Podcast. Lots of fun things coming down the pike for this year. Ultimate Direction is going to be unveiling a brand new race and ultra vest that's going to be dropping in the next couple of months. So excited to bring that to you guys. If you are in the market right now for apparel, for a belt, for a new pack, anything hydration solutions related, flasks, you name it, they've got it. They've got you covered. If you hop on to ultimatedirection.com and use code STEEPSTUFFPOD, that's one word, STEEP, STEEP, STUFF, STUFF, POD. If you hop onto ultimatedirection.com and use that code, that's going to get you 25% off your cart. Especially that we're starting to wind our way a little bit more closer to spring. You guys are going to be start to put together your race calendars, and Ultimate Direction is going to have you guys covered. So whatever you need, they've got you outfitted from head almost to toe. They don't do shoes yet. So guys, enjoy yourself. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much, and check out Ultimate Direction. Flannery Davis Love, welcome to the Steep Stuff Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing so great. Thanks for asking. I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah. How's your day going?
Okay. Yeah, I'm actually on the Western Slope where I grew up, visiting my folks. So taking advantage of the sunshine and the non-single digit temperatures that we've been getting totally bombarded with in Boulder. So I'm grateful to have some sunshine today. Yeah.
Nice. I'm jealous. We finally got a warm day in the Springs. It's like 50 today, but like yesterday was brutal. It was so cold. It's like, oh, I don't want to get out and train. Cold. Yeah, it's the treadmill has been my best friend the last few weeks. It's been brutal.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad we could finally have a conversation. I told you this before we started the episode. Like, I've had so many people reach out to me. Like, you're popular. So I definitely am so excited to finally have a conversation with you. There's a lot to talk about. I think for fans that might not be familiar with you, maybe like dive into, just give us a little like 5-minute synopsis on your background. Maybe talk about your experience in the soccer realm and things like that.
Yeah, more than happy to. My journey into running too is pretty untraditional, non-linear, you could say. So I'll try to keep it brief, but I actually did not grow up as a runner. I was always really big into soccer. Starting when I was about 11 years old, it kind of became my main passion. And from there on out, my goal was to play Division One soccer. So I was really fortunate to have parents who could support me in that. And went to training camps and recruiting camps and was in things like I'm not sure if people are familiar with in the running world, but like Olympic developmental programs and kind of higher elite clubs. So all to say that did all of that through middle school and high school, and ended up going to college to play soccer, Division One soccer in California for a pretty small liberal arts school, part of the WCC. So at the time, we played schools like Santa Clara, BYU, Portland, Loyola Marymount, Pepperdine, things like that. The short story with that is that, I mean, it was a dream come true. I'd worked really hard to get there, and my college experience was not easy. Very much like, you go from being a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a big pond. And I don't think my story is super unique in that way. Unfortunately, that was not the worst part of my career. I had a really difficult coach. I had some really difficult experiences. I got injured my sophomore year. So all to say that my college soccer experience definitely left some things to be desired. And I felt pretty unfulfilled leaving, even though I finished my career in one piece somehow after a massive ankle surgery. But I kind of came out of college ready to transition into something new, being like simultaneously proud of myself for making it through college and also saying, yeah, I need a break. I'm feeling pretty burnt out, not really feeling super excited to touch a ball after that. Kind of skip ahead a little bit and I find myself in Boulder. I had kind of dipped my toes into the running scene in the Bay Area and had discovered like Solomon Run Club, which at the time back in 2017 was a big place to like meet people and run like a couple of miles and you drink beer together. And then I moved to Boulder. I'd gotten a job here, and that's really when I think my place and my fulfillment in the running community got so much more. There was more depth to be had. I found community. I found people who I like to run with, and then I really started getting into the running itself and recognizing that I could be okay at it. So then you skip ahead a couple more years, and I find myself going after this really audacious goal to run in the Olympic trials for the marathon. And I think that's been a huge pivotal point for me in my confidence and esteem as a runner, was kind of going from running a 2:48 marathon, setting that goal, and then the following year, about 10, 12 months later, running a 2:36. Such a highlight, in so many ways. And the trials was fun and such a meaningful experience, but the work up to get there has been really something I can like hang my hat on. And it's funny hearing you say people want to hear you on the pod, because I still am like, people like, how do people know who I am? Like, I don't think I'm really that strong of an athlete. And so I have to continue to remind myself, right? Like, you've shown up, you continue to kind of put your place, or put yourself on the map and say that you want to work hard and compete. And so a lot of reflections I have on that. I'll stop for now because I've kind of gone off the deep end with that. But I love to compete. I love sport. I love the community around it. Yeah.
Well, it's so special to have you on the podcast, and I love your story. And in fact, it's kind of weird. So I had a catastrophic ankle surgery as well, and I was also not on a, well, your and I story is a little bit different. My formative years, I was a soccer player as well, all the way through high school and wanting to play in college. I did not play at the D1 level in college, but my career was kind of ended because of I broke my left ankle, bad surgery, yada yada yada, and then found him running. But I just find it's funny. Like I grew up in South Florida as a soccer player, if you will, and a lot of the athletes that I competed against and with wound up going on to that D1, into the D1 realm, playing collegiate level and some into the professional level, or trying to get into the professional level. So it's a very interesting thing for me to see us finally see a soccer player. Not too many people played soccer. Johnny Lunalima is a great example. I think he's like the only other person I can name off the top of my head that like played soccer at a high level and then comes over to the trails and is a formidable athlete. So that's very cool. It's nice to meet another soccer player.
Same. That's awesome.
Yeah. So you're probably around my age. Do you remember who Mia Hamm was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
My
probably got a picture of her up there.
my sister and I are a few years apart, and my sister is actually probably about your age, and she was way more into it than I was, and played soccer all the way up into the collegiate level, and she won like some contest like from Kellogg's when we were kids, where we got to go to Orlando and like meet Mia Hamm. She got to go to Orlando to meet Mia Hamm, and I just like kind of tagged along. It's pretty cool. I don't know. It's like the one cool soccer story I have with like a professional soccer player.
Yeah, I mean, she was such a hero, right? Her and Brandy Chastain. I mean, you just think about it. What was wild for me was going to having these heroes to then, when I was in high school and college, a lot of my teammates were then eventually on the national team. So I don't know if names like Lindsay Horan, she was one of my teammates when I was growing up in Colorado playing and is on the national team. Julie Ertz was playing for Santa Clara when I broke my ankle or tore my ankle ligaments. So it's just funny to like go from seeing your heroes and then all of a sudden you're playing against them and these huge names. And it just goes to show the caliber too is so drastic in college as well. I mean, even at a D1 level, like the difference between, like those level of players versus like the rest of us was just so interesting and really eye-opening and humbling. It's such a popular sport in our country. It's growing more popular every day, but it was such an experience to be a part of. I don't regret any of it. It was all, I think, very informative and constructive for who I became as a runner. Definitely.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, because like growing up in South Florida for myself, like it's like soccer is a big deal just because there's a strong multicultural push there. Like a lot of South American countries are very well represented. In Colorado, growing up, especially like Western Slope area, was there like good infrastructure in place to like, to get good and like have good competition?
Great question. And the answer is no, there was not. It's probably grown a lot since I've lived here. But it's funny. Part of my story was with soccer and kind of competing and trying to find places to get seen and get recruited was that I ended up for most of my high school years traveling either to Salt Lake or Denver to compete in an infrastructure that could support and get me seen to play in college. So I played ODP in Utah. That's a whole story. But that was like 2 years spent playing at an Olympic developmental level, getting seen by other coaches, and then eventually getting semi-recruited to some degree to play for Rush, the club team Rush in Denver. And then for the last 2 years of my high school experience, every week I was driving to Denver for practice in the middle of the week. I was also playing basketball at the time. Sometimes I'd be like leaving school early or missing basketball practice to go to Denver, practice for 45 to 60 minutes, and then drive home.
From the Western Slope.
And then the following, yes, from the Western Slope. and then on the weekends, either flying wherever a tournament was or going back to Denver to play in games. It was, I mean, I look back on that and I asked my parents, what were we thinking?
Yeah, your parents were saints.
And then I'm also, the fact that they were willing to do that, I will never take that for granted. It's a little bit bewildering to think about how much time we just spent, trying to achieve this thing. I feel I can never be, more grateful for that and their support in doing that.
It's so cool. I mean, you don't meet too many parents that are like so invested into it. That's how my mom was. My mom was very much one of those people that like traveled every weekend with my sister, sometimes with me. I was a bad kid, so not as much, but to my sister, traveled all over the place and all over the time to play soccer and just play sports. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. And an immense privilege, right? I recognize that a lot, that I lived in a middle income, middle class family where we were able to do that. And I wasn't required to work. My parents said, okay, well, eventually maybe you'll support your way through college with a scholarship, which was just a wonderful thought. But that I do also recognize that there's so much privilege in how I got to grow up. As you get older, you just become wiser and realize that your experience isn't what everybody else has. And so recognizing where I did have some immense leaps and bounds that a lot of kids don't get, I try to really appreciate.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's such a cool story. Let's bridge the gap to Boulder a little bit. So you'd moved to Boulder, and can you talk, like, we have a lot of fans in Boulder. I've talked to an enormous amount of athletes in Boulder. Can you talk maybe a little bit about like the infrastructure that's in place as someone that is new to the trails, and then you come to Boulder, you start training, And there's just like amazing trails and just infrastructure in place to be able to develop and get good. And that it seems like very much an aspect of your story. Maybe talk about not just the community, but just like everything, how it came together to kind of like, it's really pushed you, to new heights, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Boulder is such a unique place for a variety of reasons. And I know others who probably listen and live in Boulder understand that just the mere terrain and topography of the area is a key element to growing as an athlete. I mean, in terms of steep stuff, right? That is like the number one thing that I think is very unique to Boulder is there's really nowhere to go but up if you're in the open space. And so having a backyard where there's Green Mountain, Bear Peak, South Boulder Peak, the skyline, I mean, you can just start going up very quickly. And there's such a variety of run groups and people who are running those mountains year round. Where previous to moving to Boulder, I would never run at night by myself alone on a pavement, on like a paved road. And then all of a sudden you go into the middle of winter in Boulder, Colorado, running at night up a mountain. And it just changes how you think about it. And it's a very relative statement to go from being, oh my gosh, I'm never going to run past, outside pavement to saying, well, I'm never going to run this mountain at night to saying, well, I guess I'll run this mountain all year long. And then you just get better at it because you're doing it at night. You're pushing yourself with other athletes around you. You're wearing spikes. You're taking off spikes. You're cold. You're warm. So that in itself, I think, is really key. And then the diversity, right? If you don't want to go up, then you go out and you go towards like Tom Watson and the Res. And I think something I would point out when you mention kind of my story in particular is that I've always, I think as a new runner, been really drawn to both sides of the coin of running, where I love road running and I love trail running. And because I'm in a spot where it's not my job, I get to really try and do both and try to have my cake and eat it too, where I really value training for a marathon, but I also really like getting away from that, especially after the trials. I was just so excited to not touch pavement or flat running for such a long period of time. But that there is community and there is the types of terrain to do both at a very high level. And you can find those people to train with regardless of that, of your scope and where you want to be. But that's definitely a huge part of Boulder. I think that's why so many people come here. It's just an incredible and unique setting.
Do you have are you more of a solo runner? Do you like running by yourself more, or do you like training with a group of other gals and guys to push you along?
Yeah, it's funny. I've tended to be more of a solo trainer, especially when I'm training for a race. I was training with a group called Rise Running, which was Nell Rojas. She was my coach before the race that I qualified for the trials at, and I really enjoyed that because I haven't run a marathon since the trials. I haven't been training with that group as much, but I really hope to find a good group of women to push me in flat running, especially. I definitely think I sit in a weird middle ground where I'm not a 2:45 marathoner, but I'm not a 2:30 marathoner. And there's a lot of people in those two camps in Boulder, but the 2:35, 2:36 is this kind of enigma. And so it's funny you ask, because I'm trying to find groups of people who I can train with where I can be a rabbit for folks, but where I can also have a rabbit. And I think that involves some volume, right? There can't just be two of you, because then it's always going to be one person pushing the other, or finding, someone who has a different skill set as you. But all to say that, yeah, I think I've definitely trained more solo and kind of lone wolf in the past. And I've been trying to figure out groups to train with who can kind of also fill my cup in the trail and the road running scene. I think a really cool shout out I'll give is to Andy Wacker, who's started the trail team in Boulder, and he's really trying to do that. And I've been meaning to get back to him because I'd love to start training with them again. I kind of did a quick little appearance and was training with them for a bit, and then my training schedule changed. But all to say that he has such a diversity of people showing up who want to ski, like do skimo, do road running, do trail running. And so I really kind of give him a head nod for starting that in an area where it's really prevalent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, giant kudos to Andy. Andy's the man. And just not just a first ballot Hall of Famer in our sport, but like just what he's building as far as community goes is just insane. I need to reach out to him too, actually, something regarding the trail team. But yes, just put that on my list of things I got to do for today. So it's really interesting, the training aspect, because you really do fit into two camps. I mean, you are an extremely elite mountain runner, and we'll talk about your 2024 results in a little bit. But just like from an Olympic trials perspective, I mean, like 2:36 is something that like, that is a very elite time. That is very solid. And you're relatively new to, distance running in a lot of ways. Obviously, we'll talk about the trials in a second, but like, do you want to continue to whittle that time down? Like, do you have aspirations to go back in, 2028?
Yeah, it's such an interesting place to be in now that I have run that time. And as like a competitive athlete my whole life, there is some reflection and pressure to say, was that a fluke? Was that something I could do again? And it's really hard to not get lost in your own head around that result, and then the pressure to do it, and then say, okay, yeah, I can kind of relive that. I can validate myself in that space and get better. And of course, I have goals to try and whittle that time down. To your point, I think the sky is the limit in terms of my potential. And I try to remind myself of that when I start to negatively motivate myself, that I still feel very new at this. And yeah, I don't think I'm past the days where I'm, going from like running, my first marathon was 3 hours and 28 minutes to a 3:03 to a 2:54 to a 2:48 to a 2:36. Like, I'm not going to be taking off 45 minutes any longer, but I do think I've started to hone in on, okay, clearly this is something I can continue to get better at. And I'm starting to notice where my weaknesses and my strengths are, where I have this actual interesting, I think, oppositional trajectory from most road runners, where I kind of went backwards in distance. And I started in the ultra world. I didn't go immediately into hundreds, but my first big run ever was Dirty 30. I ran a 50K. I hated it. I thought it was terrible. Then I ran like 100K. I ran Never Summer a couple years later. Then I ran Leadville a couple years after that. And then I started kind of working my way back down into really focusing on the marathon. Like, I had run marathons here and there, but I'd never truly focused on that distance. And so instead of your more typical collegiate athlete who goes like mile, 5K, 10K, half marathon, I've kind of gone backwards. So all to say that my strengths have really been endurance, and that my body actually starts to warm up starting like mile 12, 13, where when I was running McCurdy's, the race where I qualified for the trials, I said that to, the people with me. I was like, wow, I finally feel warmed up, and that I could sustain a pace that maybe people coming from the opposite direction might have a harder time saying, oh, can I run 6 minutes, 6-minute miles from a half marathon to a marathon? For me, it was much easier to bridge that gap. My weaknesses, however, are that I struggle at the 10K, 5K distance to go much faster than my marathon pace. So that's just kind of an example of where I'm hoping to get a lot stronger and to hone in on my weaknesses. Now that I have this base, now that I know I can perform at an elite level, it's really starting to dissect the smaller improvements and hopefully going right from a 2:36 to a 2:35 or a 2:34. Can that turn into a 2:33, 2:32? I'm not sure what the limit is or what the ceiling is for me, but I like to believe that there is more in the tank, and it's really inspiring in the women's running scene right now, and that you've got people like Kira D'Amato, Sarah Hall, who are in their 40s and their late 30s. And so I get really excited that I have hopefully many good years ahead to keep trying to whittle that down. And 2028, I really do hope is in the picture for me to try to compete at the trials again.
Yeah. I mean, you're still obviously so young. You have so much time, but I think a lot of that too. Have you started? Because a lot of it too is what it's a math problem, and it's also figuring out getting more efficient with nutrition. There's a few different things that you can do to obviously, whittle that down. Are you working with a coach specifically for those things?
Right now, I'm kind of being self-coached, kind of looking at past training plans, looking at how what I've gained a lot of success from in past training plans with past coaches. If I were to start training for a marathon again in particular, I'd like to start dialing it in with a coach once again and trying to figure out who that could be. To your point, there's just so many parts of the equation that I still have a lot to learn from as a newer runner. Nutrition, strength training, when to back off, when to add more, how to add volume. Do I need to add volume? Right. So questions where I could definitely use that support. And it's just figuring out who that person could be. And to kind of go back to your other question, what kind of training environment could push me as that some more solo training runner. I think I could really benefit from being pushed by a bigger group. And so kind of finding that, especially in Boulder, it's interesting. I didn't think it would be very hard. And at times it's felt challenging to find a group that really fits the bill, especially as this hybrid trail and road runner.
Yeah. Are you, all right, we could transition to the trails. I want to talk a little bit about that too, like as far as the, like the mountain running scene. I mean, I think you've had so many impressive results in 2024. Actually, you know what? Hold on. Before we go to the trail, I do want to ask one more question. Do you like marathon training? Like, it's got to be so brutal on your body. Like, I've done one marathon block in my life and I hated it. I'm much more a 10K, probably a 10K to a half marathon guy. Like, marathon is just so far and so painful. Maybe talk about that a little bit on how, like, do you look forward to that type of training?
Yeah, great question. I think it's such two-tone. It's such a two-toned thing. I enjoy the structure of it so much, and I think that goes back to being such a competitive athlete my whole life. Is sometimes it's really nice to have somebody else telling you what to do and knowing exactly what you're doing and working towards a goal and having a focus. I think as athletes, we really crave that. And so I have to kind of take a step back sometimes and not be so obsessive and rigid around my training schedule because I can really get into this daily routine of I need to get these miles and I need to get this workout in. And life happens and you have to be okay with that. But there is something that fuels me and energizes me when I am in a really intense training block for a marathon. On the other side of that, it is really intense and really rigid, and it can be exhausting and fatiguing. I've learned that I actually really like training for marathons in the late summer. I love getting up early to beat the heat, and you feel like you have the whole day ahead of you, and you can get 12 miles in before 8 a.m. without it being freezing. So I really like that aspect, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was when I was training for McCurdy's. I was so worried I was going to miss the trail scene. And I think part of it was that I had this goal of I want to make the trial. So I was willing to kind of give up trail time. And two was that just I did enjoy it and enjoyed the higher volume and working towards a goal. But I think my body was definitely pretty tired for a lot of that block. I was sleeping really well, thankfully. And I will say then after making the trials on, that was October of 2023. Then I kind of took 2 weeks off and started training immediately for the Olympic trials in February. And that was incredibly difficult for me. Training through the winter, I already don't like.
It's so hard.
Training over the holidays, the worst. Winter, oh, so hard. I'm a skier too, so I'm also kind of was giving up part of my ski season. I got sick a lot. It was the holidays, and I was really burnt out training for the trials. And so I took a really big step back after that because I recognized my body and my mind this time. Unlike McCurdy's, where I just felt my body breaking down, which I feel like is normal for a high intensity marathon training plan. I felt my mental stamina was also breaking down. And so I took a big step back from marathon training after that. And I think that is something a lot of us as runners have to come to terms with, is listening to both our bodies and our minds. And that is kind of segue nicely what led me to focus more on trails going into 2024 and kind of saying, I'm not even sure I want to run a marathon for the remainder of the year.
And you smashed it. Before we get to trails, I just have one more question because I'm so curious about the Olympic trials. Because most of the people I've spoken to that have gone, like most of the people that I know that have gone to the trials to actually race, it's been like 3 times they've gone, 2 times they've gone. You're the first person I've talked to that this was your first time. What was that like standing on that start line? Was that terrifying or was it exciting? Like what was that like?
Yeah, it was an experience I'll never forget. Definitely a core memory, hopefully more to come. But I think the one thing that I always mention to folks is that going into the trials felt a lot different than going into my qualifier. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of parameters and criteria for who makes the Olympic team that just objectively I was not going to make. So knowing that and knowing my fitness level and the winter I'd had, I got to go into the trials with a lot of weight lifted on pressure. There was no expectation for me to make the team. The expectation was to go enjoy it and do it and, work as hard as I could and just really be present with that emotion and the gratitude that I got to be there until that line. So the environment for me felt like a parade. Like that was my Olympics, was to get to be there. I had friends who flew in, my whole family came out. It was just such a cool experience to have them all there and really get to run by them several times because it was a looped course. It was so hot. That was also something I had to remind myself of, not just suffocating in the heat with the 10 a.m. start time and just being like, you get to be here, pour some more water on yourself. And the race generally feeling okay. I actually had a decent race until about mile 18, and then the wheels fell off and my calves were out of this world. But I digress. Yeah, that experience was super cool from the standpoint of no real expectation to perform, which for me is also good. I'm constantly putting that pressure on. You need to perform, you need to win, you need to be number one. So it was actually a really good exercise for me to say, oh, you just get to be here and be present and enjoy the experience. Just try to do that, Flan. And the start line was a cool experience because I had not really, it had not set into me what was happening. And we're on the start line, all of these athletes are in front of me, like the people who are going for the team, these people you look up to in the sport. The cameras are rolling and the announcer says, you guys you women are the top 200 marathon runners in the country. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I'm one of those people. So that was where it really hit me. What was happening was on the start line. I had not really processed what was going on until it was about to start. And that really set the tone for that enjoyment and that presence of, oh yeah, like this year in 2024, you are one of the top 150 to 200 women marathon runners in the country. And life will continue to happen, and maybe you'll get that again, but you don't know for sure. So right now, enjoy it. Just enjoy that moment.
Soak it in. I can imagine that experience. Like, it's so epic, I don't know. It's especially like, not that like, I don't know, the idea of representing Team USA, whether that's on the trails or whether that's, in the Olympics, it's pretty damn cool. And then, just getting to be there with, your peers and, you earned that spot to race against these ladies. It's pretty exciting. It's just something you might never get again, something you could have many times over, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Let's talk trails. Your 2024 season, like I am, like if you show up to Broken Arrow, the 46K, like as fit as you were for some of these like efforts in 2024, your peers should be absolutely terrified. Like I'm so excited to cheer you on in 2025. Like, so let's talk U.S. mountain running champs. You went top 10 at Snowbird there, which is a tough course. Like that's a nasty hard course. And against like some of the best ladies in the world, like Grayson's world class, obviously. And many of the other ones were as well. What was that race like to you? Like, how was that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're so kind. Your words mean a lot. I I am humbled because this sport has grown so much, and I do not consider myself in that caliber, which is a whole other can of worms. But to that point, right, showing up to Snowbird was this idea of I wanted to start putting myself out there and competing against the best. Where kind of coming full circle, before I'd run McCurdy's in the Olympic trials, I not only didn't think I could compete, it's almost as though I had this like mental block that I didn't want to get to a place with running where competition was everything. And I was trying to keep running at this really fun level, even though inherent to my being is that sport and competition go together. And that's okay. And so there was almost this reintegration of recognizing that I could have a different relationship with running than soccer and still want to compete. So like that theme is kind of something to keep in mind with me and my journey into running and into competing at a higher level. So then signing up for the 15K USATF champs was to test that out and say, okay, I want to try to get back into trails. I want to test myself at these shorter distances once again, kind of working backwards. Unlike most people, I didn't have really a lot of interest in going back into hundreds and ultras yet. I wanted to test myself on these punchier efforts and also see if that would help me get better at shorter road distances as well, right? Focusing on higher intensity speed training. So going into Snowbird, it was kind of like, we'll see what happens, enjoy it, but compete. And knowing who was going to show up and saying, okay, well, just show up and see what you can do. I definitely, from the get-go, was like, wow, this is going to be quick, and it's such a punchy course. But true to what I know about myself, I got stronger as the race went on. And over the last 2 to 3 years in particular, I would say my downhill competency as a trail runner has improved tremendously. This goes back to what we mentioned about Boulder. When you're running Green Mountain in the middle of the night, in the winter and the summer, all the time with other people, you just get better at running downhill on technical terrain. That mountain is so technical. You don't get that almost anywhere else in the world, or in the country, I should say. So I've gotten a lot better at downhill running, and I really just tried to kind of take a nice measured pace on the up, not overextend myself, not redline too much, and then really send it on the way down. And to be completely honest, I didn't actually know where I was place-wise. I know I started to pass people kind of coming down, so I knew that I was making up ground. But then I still wasn't able to kind of catch a couple girls who I saw in front of me. So I had no idea if I was like top 10 or top 15 or top 20. So when I crossed the line was really the first time that I realized I'd kind of gotten top 10. And it was cool to see that people were like, wow, you did so good. Like, was that what you expected? And I was like, I tried really not going with any expectation, but knowing that I wanted to be there and just compete against these other really high class women.
Yeah. One thing I could say about circ races as opposed to other races that I've done, like 27Ks and 30K races, like, I don't know, that 10K distance or that like mountain classic distance is so difficult because like if you don't assert yourself in the race early on, it is very hard to catch people. Like I'm impressed to hear you say that late in the race you're rolling people up, because that's not an easy thing to do and very rarely happens. Like if you don't put yourself in, it's also very easy to make mistakes too, you know. So it's a tricky dance, those distances.
Truly. And to your point, you know, it could also say that I wasn't pushing my threshold enough on the up, right? That I had so much left in the gas tank on the down that maybe I was, you know, preserving a little too much. And if I had given a little bit extra effort on the uphill, maybe I would have caught those girls on the down. So it's interesting. I'm still learning, right? That 10K threshold in trail and road is so difficult and such a fine line of completely blowing your wad.
Right. That's it. Like you don't know
really
if you're going to blow up or not. Right. You know? Yeah, I think that's why, I don't know, the Cirque Series races, like I just happen to love so much because like, I don't know, I feel like I can blow up and maybe it, like if it's a Golden Trail Series race, if I blow up, I'm not coming back. Right. But if it's like something a little bit less in competition, if you blow up, usually you can try to come back a little bit. But like if you do it in a Cirque Series race, like I did it in Brighton, I completely blew myself up in like the first 3 miles of the race. Yeah, there's no coming back. You're dead. Like it's over. So it's fun.
Truly. Yeah, those are great races. They've done such a wonderful job. Another huge shout out to Cirque Series. They're such fun races.
Let's talk about Pikes Peak Marathon, because I think that was an interesting one where like you're someone going into this race, you, Sarah Gould, Jennifer Yeaman, there was quite a few ladies going in with the ability to go win that race this year. Like Christina didn't come back, you know, like it seemed like the top podium spots were like very, a little more open. How much was it like kind of I wouldn't say a mind fuck, but like how much was it like getting into your psyche? Because everybody told me this. Like I've had people tell me like they should have just canceled the race because like going to bar trail and back or bar camp and back completely just like ruined it for so many people.
Oh, I've got to like find some zen with Pikes Peak because her and I have a history, and I will try not to go too far down this rabbit hole. The short version of this is that I actually tried to run Pikes Peak Ascent in 2019, and it also got revised the morning of 20 minutes before, and we went to bar camp. And that was the last time I tried to do Pikes Peak, was that day. And I told it's a very long story that we do not need to get into. We do not have time to, but I was so mad in that moment. I was such a young runner and I'd been so excited to test myself. And then that race got changed and I was beside myself, which says a lot about me. So I took a break and I was like, I'm not going back to that race for a long time. And then someone kind of got it in my head, I think Pikes would be a really good race for you. You have such success at the marathon distance with the stamina and the endurance training that you have. You're a good downhill runner now. And kind of the seed got planted in my head that I could really compete. And to be completely transparent, you're right. I was going into that race, the marathon in particular, knowing my strengths and endurance, trying to win. Knowing it wasn't a Golden Trail Series race that year, so I was going to have to compete against some of the elite Africans, with a woman, I think Christina, you've mentioned, who wins almost every year.
Yeah, Christina Mascarenhas.
So there was an opening. Yeah. And so I kind of went in with this high hope and saying, yeah, I really want to compete at this race, knowing how high caliber it is and also knowing my history. So to now bring us back to 2024, to have it revised again the morning of was some cruel, sick humor. And yet the silver lining was that me as a person, even, 6 years later, 4 or 5 years later, my perception and my wisdom kind of dealing with that was much different. I was still very upset, but I was like, what are you going to do? And I expected it once again because of the history I'd had from 2019. I said that the night before, said they are going to change it 100%. And everyone's like, no, they're not. They haven't done it yet. I'm like, they're going to. They are going to revise it in the morning. So I grieved it. And then I said, time to move on because you got to go run it. So I changed my, fueling strategy. I was like, I'm going to wear a belt. I'm not going to wear a vest. And I just said, okay, it's going to be what it's going to be. And I knew kind of going into that race that it was going to be a different challenge because once again, my strengths in a half marathon distance versus a marathon are much different. And I knew I was going to probably be working a little hard on the up. There's a lot of women with strong engines on the up, but then I knew I could catch people on the way down. And that's kind of what happened. Of course, I was disappointed. If you go into a race thinking you might have a chance to win and you get fourth, you're not happy with fourth. But my mental capacity and distress tolerance around dealing with that experience for the second time is actually what I was most proud of.
Yeah.
And again, through that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. You know what? It's a bummer to me. I have had so many, it's like, I made the mistake of telling people I'm on the board of that race now. And I have had so many people reach out to me and be like, yo, this race needs to not be in September. It needs to be in August. Like we need to move it back. So that way it's not like interrupted by, because like in August, I guess the concern why they moved it from August to September was there was like concern of thunderstorms to the best of my understanding. And now it's the opposite where there's concern of snowstorms with it being so late in the calendar. So I don't know. I can't speak too much to it.
To be fair, yeah, in 2019, it was hailstorms that canceled the race. It was the most outrageous hailstorm, breaking car windows. I'm in the springs. I hear this is actually quite common. It was terrifying, but they canceled it. And the funniest part is that this year they only revised the marathon, which I was running. And in 2019, they only revised the ascent. So the marathon went on without a hitch in 2019, which I wasn't running. And the ascent went on without a hitch in 2024, which I was not running. So I've kind of just decided maybe we're like Pikes and we're going to agree to disagree probably for the rest of our lives.
I think here's my guess. Third time's the charm. We'll bring you, if you don't go to Worlds, we'll bring you back in 2025 and it's going to go off perfectly. I think that's the optimistic way to look at it.
We'll knock on wood. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that is, I mean, oh my gosh, like, you know what, we're working on, because this year is going to be the 70th anniversary. We're working on, not to hype it up too much and try and sell you, but we're working on having a really solid elite field. It's the 70th anniversary. We'll have, we'll see what shakes out with who's going to Worlds and who's not, but whoever's not going to go to Worlds, we're going to be trying to be recruiting them, getting as many athletes over there as possible, make it, an extra fun. But yeah, and it's funny because you're not the only person. I've had like Darren Thomas, so many people say to me like, dude, they changed it, and changing it just like completely took me out of the race. Like I just wasn't as excited about it. So it's a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet also, like, I'm not just saying this because you're on the board. I do have this newfound maturity to recognize that this is a massive organization who
Yeah.
has to make decisions based on everyone involved. And do I always agree with the decision made? No. But am I the one organizing this race? No. I am just a participant. I'm one microcosm, and it's selfish and narrow-minded to just say that this is affecting me, and that there could have been such larger risk and harm done to other people by continuing the race the way it was. So I recognize that, even though it wasn't what I wanted, even though it's frustrating, this is a massive organization with
It
a
is a
lot
big
going
one.
on.
I don't really blame you because the first thing that goes to my mind and I think about is the elite field because I'm an athlete and I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, like, yes, there is people running significantly slower on the course and we have to be mindful of that. But yeah. All right. So before we're limited on time here, I want to pivot to Long's Peak because I think that was one of the things I had so many people reach out and be like, yo, you need to talk to Flannery about Long's Peak. Like you had like this Sabrina Stanley moment where you got the record, someone took your record, and then you went back and like and it's so hard to do this. You went back and lowered it by like 15 minutes, which a month apart, like we gotta pave this out and talk about it. Like let's talk about the first record getting, and then we'll talk about like your motivation to go back.
Yeah, this was probably the highlight of my year for a variety of reasons. And I think it's important the way you've structured this conversation, because now I can offer insight within my race schedule of how this worked. So, full transparency, the first time I went out for the FKT, which was the week before A Basin Cirque Series, which was always supposed to be a kind of a primer for pikes. So I'm really kind of honing in on all of my training because I want to go and I want to compete to win at pikes. And so I kind of say to my husband, who was kind of helping me at the time, you know, what should I kind of plan to do? And Longs is in our backyard. I love that mountain. I've been up at quite a few different times. I haven't gone up the standard route since I first moved here, usually doing some variation. So we kind of decide, let's go up and keep the FKT in the back of your head, but treat it like a training effort. And it was kind of like me trying to trick my brain into saying, work hard, but work hard because it's an effort for something else, not just because it's an FKT. So I have a lot of thoughts around that, but to just say that I go and I kind of do the effort because I was unsure and I was a little, I think, insecure around could I even be close to what the FKT currently was. Felt like a low-hanging fruit, but you also don't want to overextend and be overconfident. So I go and I'm feeling really good and I picked a perfect line, and the whole time I'm running, I feel really leveled. And I feel like I'm working hard, but I'm working smart. And on the way down, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this feels really good. I'm feeling really happy with this. And I had gotten kind of in my head a different time than what the actual FKT was. I think I'd added an hour for some reason. So I think the FKT was like 3:46 and I thought it was 4:46. So I'm kind of running down. And as I'm running down, I'm realizing that I'm going to get it. And I like consciously backed off. And so I look back on that and I think to myself, there's a lot going on there. One, you thought you were doing better than you were, that you could have done. Two, you thought the FKT was different. You thought you were already slamming it out of the ballpark. Three, I was training for a race and it was a training effort. But when I look back on that time, there's huge vulnerabilities in that, which is if you're going for an FKT, why not absolutely send it? And I didn't learn that until obviously this all went about happening. But, fast forward, right? So that pikes that happened initially was this training effort. I went into A Basin that weekend feeling pretty crummy, actually. So I definitely put in a good effort. But I do remember thinking to myself, I think I could have given that more and kind of like, oh, well, like I'm training for pikes. It is what it is. This was just supposed to be fun. So that's the first effort. I'm not sure if you want me to move into the second one yet, if you have questions for me on that.
No, take it away. Take it away.
So yeah, then we fast forward, right? And pikes doesn't happen as planned. And I'm unfulfilled. I am feeling like I have something left to give. I am feeling unsatisfied with the way that my season is ending. And it just so happens that I think the week after pikes, maybe it was 2 weeks. I'll have to go back and look. You might know. another athlete in Boulder who had also had an unsatisfying end to her season, I believe, Emily Caldwell, who I've raced against in the past. I actually don't know her very well, but I see that she's gone after it. And another woman had gone after it as well. I'm not remembering her name right now, but she had a really good downhill. And so I'd seen other people going after it, which I thought was really interesting because for a long time, no one had really touched Long's Peak. But I see that Emily gets it. And I'm in the middle of my work day and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I realize in my head, I'm like, Flan, like, why did you not push yourself more, even though it was a training effort? And it's hindsight 2020, right? Like where I was at in that stage training for Pikes, maybe that was a good decision for me. But then having this moment of realization that I could go back and that I wanted to go back because of the circumstance of my season, realizing also this other person went back and wanted to put in an effort as well because of the circumstance of her season. And that's the beauty of community and running, is that you have these high caliber athletes and people wanting to push themselves in their own worlds and their own spheres and saying, I want to go for something. And that pushes somebody else to respond. So I decide, I'm like, I'm kind of going back and forth about it. I'm like, is this, this feels kind of petty. Should I really go back for this? And I was talking to, people in my close circle. And one thing that really stands out to me was someone saying to me, you're not sure where you're going to be next year. You don't know what's going to be happening, what you're going to be training for, just as you didn't know it was going to happen with Pikes. And someone mentioned, like Anton Krupicka had mentioned this in his LA Freeway attempt of, why not go for it now when you know you can? If you have the opening, go for it. Why wouldn't you? Like, live without regrets. And that was a really pivotal moment for me in saying, the opening's there. I have this opportunity. I'm fit for it. And I did not get it in Pikes. Why not go for it? And so I went and I found the good opening. It was the end of the season. I knew that the good days on longs were getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And so I just decided, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do it. And the second time around, let me tell you, there was nothing left to give. I absolutely buried myself going for this. I try very hard to be honest around effort, because I think there's some level of sandbagging that can be done in the community and saying, oh, well, I could have done this and could have done that. Of course we can always be better. But I know for a fact that I gave every inch of myself that day. Like, I destroyed myself in that effort. And there was consequence to that. One, unlike my line on the first time around, I was kind of missing my mark here and there because I was truly redlining the whole way up. And some of my lines up the Boulder field and then up the trough could have been better. But I was also working that much harder. So you're constantly, once again, measuring your threshold with the mental capacity to focus and remember which way is the best way and most efficient way down. And on the way down, I definitely stayed way too high on the trough. I kind of had to backtrack a little bit, but I've been looking at my watch and I was like, I got this. She's got to keep moving. Really sent the downhill, coming back all the way to the keyhole. And as I'm getting back into the Boulder field, I have not stopped for water thus far, but there was that intensity and that energy to say, you cannot stop. Don't stop. And I missed the water. So instead of going back, I just kept going. And I'm coming down kind of towards the Chasm Lake Junction. And my body starts collapsing. I was getting cramps in my legs. Things were starting to fall apart very quickly. I fell on my face. Oh my God. Is how I know I was just absolutely destroying myself, is that my body was like, you are crushing us. But I just get back up. I huck my last gel. I just absolutely slurp down this gel and just absolutely sent it. I think if I'd been a little bit smarter around nutrition, which we can get into, I would have had a little bit more left in the tank to give, but I truly did not. I could not go any faster. And I was definitely walking this tightrope of, if I tried to, I was going to cramp up again and become completely paralyzed. But somehow, some way, it is truly that effort where, to your point, Cirque, I just held on long enough to say, okay, I'm going to put this out there and try to run as close to a 3:15 as I can. And I think I ran a 3:19.
Yeah, you smashed
and I was happy with it. So there's my story for you on my FKTs. Yeah.
So the route itself, what is it? It's 10 miles with 5,500 feet or something like that, right? Somewhere in that range.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right.
Dude, that is Yeah, and like, so I just, the way I think about it is like, especially because you're above, like when you're above tree line, you're working so hard, but you're not, you're moving fast, but not really that fast, kind of thing. So like,
Yeah.
it's, how do I say this? You have to be almost like on the edge with nutrition. Talk to me a little bit about your nutrition strategy and like, what did you do to yourself like with nutrition?
Yeah, so it's funny, like, and this has been like so long ago now, I'm gonna have to like look and see, but I'm pretty sure what I was doing was a gel. I was taking a gel every 30 minutes or so. I'm gonna have to look this up for you now that I'm remembering. But the thing actually that ended up being the biggest problem was hydration.
Yeah.
That late in the season, once you get past tree line, there's really only one place to get water. And if you miss it, you miss it. So the way up, I think I purposefully said you don't need it yet. But on the way down, probably should have stopped. However, I wouldn't have broken 320 if I'd stopped.
Yeah.
Still would have gotten the FKT, but I was really wanting to get under that 320 mark. Ideally, like I think that 315 can go. There are so many strong women out there. I look forward to seeing people like Emily getting back out there, other athletes with this very specific skill set who hone in their nutrition. It can go down. But yeah, I think what I was doing, if I'm remembering correctly, was a gel. I had probably a gel every 30 to 35 minutes. I think I was taking like a Morton gel. And I had one, I think I also started with one full bottle of the Morton drink mix, which is by far my favorite thing. It's what I drank for all of McCurdy's, a really high concentrated version of that Morton drink. But yeah, I'm sorry I'm not remembering more
No, it's
closely.
fine.
I'm like looking at my straw to see.
No, I'm just so impressed that like that you took that much time off in such a like in a condensed route, like 10 miles, and to take like, I don't know, 15, it's like somewhere in the 15-minute range, like maybe more off, which is bananas. It's so crazy. So congratulations to that. That might not go down for a long time. You might be holding on to that record for a minute. That's crazy.
We'll see. There was definitely some room for it to get cut quite a bit from what it was at. I think, major kudos to Emily, who has who lit that fire, right? It takes other people in the community for you to kind of say, hey, this could keep going. This could keep getting lower. And I'm always humbled by the skill and the speed of this community, and we'll see what comes of it. But I do think we're past the point of 15 minutes, right? Hours getting cut off of the unsupported time. And to be honest, I think unsupported and supported for longs doesn't matter too much. I think as a kind of a purist, unsupported is, I think, the way to do it. And it should be pretty synonymous with the supported time. If you're kind of watching all the different parts of it and kind of controlling your controllables. But all to say that I think it's going to be minutes, right? If someone could get to 315, I think it's there, but I don't think it's not going to just be chopping off these huge amounts of time anymore from that FKT.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, congratulations. Do you have any other like FKTs on the horizon that you think, obviously, it's bad form to spray, but like, I'm just so curious, like what you did on longs was amazing. I'm sure it opened your eyes to, well, there's some other routes that might be kind of interesting. Is there anything else that like, like spikes your attention at all, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've not as been as gung-ho on the FKT train, I think, as other folks, but after doing longs, it definitely makes me think more about it and what I'd want to go after. I don't have a lot of interest in just going after an FKT for FKT's sake, kind of like picking at low-hanging fruit. I think there's a place for that, and it's super fun. And once again, it can be a high motivator for people. But generally speaking, I'm trying to kind of be more intentional around where I place my effort in this era of trying to compete and trying to show up against kind of high caliber athletes is where I'm trying to hone in and focus my time. So in Boulder, there's a ton of really hard FKTs. One that will be really gnarly for me to ever get and would be really fun is Green Mountain. It's just a mountain where I've built a lot of my skills. But there are some fast women, especially on the uphill, that I'm just not sure I can keep up with. But on the down, I think I could probably keep up for the most part. It'll take some concentrated effort to get that one because it's just so stout now. And there's so many fast women in Boulder who've gone after it. So that's definitely one I've considered. There's a variety of others that I've kind of been chewing on, but nothing super concrete. So if you have any ideas for me, let me know.
Oh, I was gonna bring up the Grand just because unfortunately with the whole Michelin Sari thing, it kind of like
Yeah.
put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But I'm like, dude, we gotta. This is there's just. I'd love to see more like high caliber mountain runners, like especially on the women's side, go take a crack at it. I think it was just at Karina Anderson on the podcast, and I was like, hey, that's be a cool idea because she wants to go after like the Matterhorn. But yeah, the Grand would be cool. I think it's Jen Day Denton that has the record on that. So on the Grand. So I don't know. There's always some cool. It's
Wow.
like especially at your caliber, you think about it. It's like, well, what once you get longs, it's like what else high altitude like compels me, and then obviously the Grand is like super like complex, and there's a lot of I wouldn't just say complexity to it, but it's just technicality. It makes it kind of funky, but like,
Yes.
but I don't know. There's cool stuff. Let's talk 2025 because I saw you on you're on the start line for Broken Arrow, like I said already, and you're on the start line for Sunapee. Obviously, those are just one is June 1st, one is June 14th. I don't know. It's like the second or third week in June. What has you more excited? I know it's kind of a difficult question, but
Yeah, I actually have already pretty clear plans around them. Broken Arrow is definitely my A race. Broken Arrow is where I know I can compete given my strengths, right? I'm going to be stronger lap 2. That's where I'm going to start to really shine. I do better as I go on, right? Where Sunapee is definitely going to be more of a primer, more of a Cirque Series style race with girls who just have much faster 10K, 5K speed than me.
Yeah.
So going to compete always, but it's more of a primer to get me into a good position for Broken Arrow. But excited for both. And I did kind of just end up doing both of them because they're USATF races and seeing how those go, because I know that people will show up and it will be a place where I can compete and really be honest with myself about where my fitness is at. But yeah, I'm really excited for Broken Arrow. It was one of the first races I ever did coming out of college. I ran the 23K in its second year, and it was one of its snowiest years. And Broken Arrow is infamously known for its snowy years. But that will be a pretty full circle moment for me, is running the 46K, which at the time I was like, no way am I ever doing that. And I've definitely had an aversion to 2 looped courses. But now after doing McCurdy's, which was a 9 looped course, I think I have at least some mental stamina to get through the obstacle of, oh my gosh, I have to go do this again. And just knowing that it's going to be, that race has just done such an incredible job of building itself, right? And it's going to be such a high intensity weekend. I mean, I think every race that weekend is a championship race for something.
Literally.
So just to be there and be a part of that, right? It'll just be really fun to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak highly enough about Broken Arrow. One of the good things about Sunapee too, and I think it fits your MO with the looped courses. Sunapee's 2 loops, so that could help you as well.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's I think that's I think Tom made it that way, or they had to make it that way because the world's up down, if I remember correctly, is going to be 2 loops. So kind of crazy, kind of dope. Something to think about. Yeah. So I don't know. It's what is, I'm just kind of understanding your motivator. Is it more the direct goal to get on a team, or is it more so just how do I stack up against the best ladies in the country, if not the world?
It's an interesting question. It's this constant, right, balance of, can I compete at that level? And do I own it that that's what I'm going for? And do I shoot my shot? Just like I did with McCurdy's. I think time will tell, and how my summer goes and how I feel my fitness is going into late May, June, how all other things in my life are going, what stressors are there, what aren't. Ideally, going for a spot, I think would be really cool. And I won't say that's off the table, but at the end of the day, continuing on this goal of just putting myself in high competitive arenas and trying to work as hard as I can and just shoot my shot in that way and saying, I deserve to be here against these higher caliber athletes than I once even thought. And that I still, to this day, as we've talked about, have to retrain my brain into saying, like, that's a different population. I don't include myself in that, and trying to lean in and say, like, no, you can compete, and you are competing. So I know it's not a super straightforward answer, but would I, love to make worlds? Of course, that'd be super, super cool. I do also have a fall marathon on deck, Berlin, which would be the same weekend as Worlds. But if I were to make the Worlds team, I mean, I can run a marathon whenever.
Nice, nice.
So we'll
All right,
see.
all right.
TBD. Here's my answer.
I think that was a great answer. No, I love to hear it. It's because it's a tough thing to narrow down, right? You're like, you don't know what's gonna, because I don't know. These races are. I don't think people realize, like the average person realizes, like how complex it is to be able to go pull off something like that. Like fitness matters, especially for something that's a 2-loop course, like a broken arrow or something like that. Fitness matters 100%, right? Or like 90%. And I think the rest of it's a tough person contest. It's like, how much can I destroy myself and get to that point? I don't know. That's kind of like my thoughts, is like usually the person that's leading the race in the first loop is not winning the race in the second loop, which is kind of wild. Right. So some interesting thoughts on that. Yeah.
Sure. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm wishing you the absolute best of luck. I can't wait to do my free trail fantasy already. I'm excited. So let's talk. One of the things I thought was really interesting, and I'm going to crack a joke here. I don't know if you don't like this, we can cut it out. I just thought it was funny because, like, one of the things what you do for a living is Flannery Love therapy. Is that correct? And one of the things it's you're a sports psych. Is that correct? It's one of the
aspects. Yeah. So no, great question. I work in actually primary care as my main job. So I work as a primary care therapist, which is a variety of things, not just sports related, but then I do also have a private practice, which is sports psych focused. Yes.
Gotcha. Well, I saw Flannery Love therapy when I was doing the research for this, and I was like, dude, how funny would it be if it was like couples therapy, Flannery Love therapy? Get it? Huh? I don't know. I saw a little play on words there. I was like, that would have been creative. But no, for sports psych, let's talk about that a little bit, just because, I don't know. I just feel like it's so important, not just for you as an athlete, but be able, I just think that mental aspect is just so slept on and is just so important for performance. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is the bread and butter of why I'm even in this career, interestingly enough. I always knew I loved psychology, always knew it was a really passionate area of mine from a young age. And kind of that got lost in the weeds as I was becoming this highly intensive soccer focused adolescent, and kind of got lost in the should have, would haves. You should do a business degree. It makes more sense. What are you going to do with a psychology degree? Blah, blah, blah. And I really was just focused in on soccer in college. And ironically enough, as things are not going well and I am getting injured, I had to come to terms with how much of my identity was based in soccer and having to answer this question, who are you without soccer? And after college, that just got more difficult, because all of a sudden no one cares that you play Division I soccer. You're in a job. You're not doing that thing anymore that brought you community, that brought you social status, that brought you endorphins, right? There's unlimited good benefits to playing soccer and playing sports, but I had put so many of my eggs in that basket. And for lack of better words, I had something of a quarter life crisis around this concept, and recognizing that was really scary, and seeing it in other people in my life, other people across the country at a macro level. There's some really, really interesting anecdotal stories and books about this. One of my favorites and heartbreaking, I should say, is called What Made Maddie Run, actually by a CU basketball player, Kate Fagan, who I think has done an incredible job of highlighting how athletes are actually a vulnerable population when it comes to mental health. Because when we think about athletes, we think of them as highly motivated, strong, persevering, high stamina. You think of all these traits, which are true when you get on the pitch or on the track or on the court. But underneath all that pressure, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that we cannot not perform. And if we don't perform, we are failing, not only in our sport, but as people. So I can get off the deep end with this because it's something I have a lot of passion for, and I've seen it affect so many people from lived experience and now in my professional clinical experience. So that lived experience is actually what informed me into getting into the field. And I've always known in the back of my head that the population I wanted to work with on a specific level was athletes, because it's really cool to get to blend both those things, right? I now have this professional and lived experience to help address those problems that feels really, really meaningful. So it's been fun to also be an athlete now, recognizing those impacts in my own community, not just the clients in front of me, but other people in my life, people out doing ultras, people doing marathons, and there's just generally a better level of openness around mental health. But I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited to continue that reflection for myself personally and to help others, especially youth. I'm generally working with younger populations right now, but sport impacts all of us, especially in places like Boulder, Colorado, for our whole lives. So definitely look at it more holistically than just performance enhancement from a mental health aspect, right? We're not just here to get you better as an athlete. We're here to think about who you are as a person, and that an athlete is just part of that identity, multidimensional. Yeah.
It's so interesting too, because, and I hate to say this because it sounds shallow and terrible, but like some of the people I know with the worst mental health are athletes, and it's terrible to say, but like, I don't know if it's that performance aspect of it or what it is, or just having the need to be as good as you possibly can. And when you don't measure up to that, you just crush yourself. And it's like, man, like this sport is supposed to be the opposite of that. You're supposed to be empowered and excited and to go chase, big things. But it's like when the performance aspect of it takes hold, like people either sink or swim. And I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people sink with it. And it's kind of sad. It's terrible.
Yeah. A question I reflect on a lot and that I ask my clients and I ask my friends is, when you think about running or whatever sport is, right? Insert sport here. When you think about that sport and when you engage in it, are you doing it because you feel good about yourself, or are you doing it to not feel bad about yourself? Right? And are we escaping from something, or are we moving towards something? And can it be both? But as long as you're recognizing, oh, I'm escaping that bad day. Okay. I'm escaping how I feel about myself. And that if I don't run, I'm not a worthy person. That's a little different. There's a lot to uncover there. Where does that come from? What else is behind that?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of open-ended questions and reflections of how we engage with sport and what we are using it as. It is a coping mechanism for all of us. That is without a doubt. But how we engage with it as coping and recognizing that it is coping, I think, is important.
Identity too. I think that's like that. I actually full circle. Like I went to go speak to a sports psych this a couple of years ago, because you wrap so much of your identity into it. And, yeah, it can be very detrimental to the way you view yourself if you like totally soak your entire identity into like one thing. And it could be something small that gets you away from it, that, opens up your mind and realizes like, this is not my identity. I'm not just a runner. I'm many other things. But, to try to get someone to open their mind to that is very complex. It's very different. It's a more complicated thing than people think. It's interesting.
Oh yeah, you are preaching to the choir right now. I have a variety of research projects, if I ever get a PhD, that I would consider around this topic, because identity in itself and what it means to us as humans fascinates me, and how integral it is to the human experience that we need these qualifiers and these labels for ourselves. That's fascinating in itself. But then you add on this one dimensionality that a lot of us find ourselves in with sport that I still to this day find myself thinking about, right? Did I just transfer that energy from soccer to running? I hope not. I hope I've grown wiser and stronger and recognize that I care about running, but I am not just a runner. But I care about it still, and that's okay. But that it is important, and we want these labels for ourselves. It helps us make sense of who we are. And why is that? So yeah, this could be a whole separate episode.
No, I agree. We could do a whole nother episode on this.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, for sure.
It is. Well, hey, the invitation's there. If you ever want to come back on, obviously we'll talk about more accolades as we go, but if you ever want to talk about sports psych, I would love to open the conversation too. Just because, like, I don't know, I think so many people can benefit from stuff like that, and I'll preface this to the audience. Like, if anyone is dealing with something like that, go talk to someone. It's the best thing you could do is talk about it and try to work on those things, because it's a difficult struggle. Any questions? I'm curious to see who inspires you.
Ooh, okay. my parents, I mentioned how impactful they've been for me in my life. They were both really strong athletes. They were both runners in college. I think to some degree it's why I avoided it for so long, because I was so determined to make my own path as a young adult, as an adolescent. But they have been so integral in who I've become, and I'm really grateful to have good parents. Um, Other people who inspire me. Ooh, I was not ready for this question. Um, let's see here. Someone who I've been looking up to recently on the road running scene is McKenna Myler. She was actually at McCurdy's, and she has a couple really interesting accolades to her name. She's, I think, got the fastest known mile with a baby stroller, or no, fastest known mile pregnant, I think. Anyways, she just has a really interesting and unique social media presence. And like her tagline is like, have kids and have dreams too. Or you can have kids and you can have dreams. So these women in spaces who are saying like, you can be more than one thing, right? Kind of getting back to identity. And I've really loved following her journey. Don't know her personally, but she had a tremendous trials as well. So people like that who are kind of off the grid a little bit, not the famous names, but who are just really authentic and really raw and showing up in the space and trying to be honest, which, not to diverge too far, but social media these days is just such a carousel sometimes of performance. And so I'm always searching out folks who are trying to be authentic and engage and, you know, show up openly in the space. So that's definitely someone I look up to in the sports space. And then in the mental health field, I've been really inspired by people like Kate Fagan, people like Brene Brown, who is one of the best known licensed clinical social workers, doing a lot of really good work in understanding how do we show up at a micro scale when we feel hopeless, in whether it's a political climate, whether it's the world's issues, right? There's so much else going on outside of running. And so I try to temper that and understand how I can support and how I'm showing up in my work as a therapist, as a person in these micro moments. Sometimes it feels like all we can do is show kindness, show that we're listening to others, showing up raw, honestly, all these good strategies. So those are people I think right now, if I'm just popping through my head, who I'm thinking of. Yeah.
No, I think it's an amazing list. Dude, I could do an entire podcast on social media and the whole thing there. Like it's crazy.
Another good one.
Oh my gosh. Like, I think that's one thing that like drives me crazy is like authenticity. Like it's so crazy now how less you see like authenticity in social media. It's like everybody's trying to do something or be something they're not. I'm just like, man, it's really upsetting. I don't know. It's actually driven me a lot off of Instagram just because it's upsetting to see stuff like that. Yeah. It's a whole nother topic.
For a wild ride with that one. Yeah. Limiting time is what I've learned. Moderation.
Yeah. No, definitely. Because if you get too deep into it, it's, yeah. So, all right. So pre-race, you're getting ready for a race. You're walking out. What's your pump up song? What are you listening to?
Oh, I got some good ones. My go-to is a song by this like electronic band guy named Drolo. Droeloe, and it's called Snow Shovels. It is, the cadence of it is what's important to me, which is this could also be a separate podcast. The cadence of specific songs is more important to me than the actual song itself, for me to sync up my pace and my running structure, actually. So when I'm doing track workouts, the cadence of the song is actually more important than how loud it is or what type of genre it is. So that's probably my go-to. There's a song called Run Little Girl Run, which is kind of a ragey song by this, I think her name's, I didn't want to mispronounce it, Chinchilla.
All right.
I think that's her name. I will say someone's going to totally come at me for not pronouncing that right, or I'm completely mispronouncing it. But generally speaking, I have like a whole playlist of songs that I just turn on before pre-race. Interestingly, like I've had this playlist going since I was trying to run a sub-3 marathon like 7 years ago, and how far I've come from then. But it's got everything on it. I'm really kind of a lover of all music, unless it's screamo. So hip hop, electronic, pop. Once again, like the melody and the cadence of a song for me is almost more important than the words before a race. and trying to kind of just get myself into this pace, even mentally around, okay, like get ready to just absolutely send it to destroy yourself, but also like keep the pulse on where you're at. So that's kind of where I'm at with music. I could list so many songs. I'm a big music fan.
Now, it's interesting too, like, because I got to ask this from a marathon perspective. I know in trail racing, like, especially like short distance trail racing, you're not really listening to music, but like from a marathon, that's so far, in my opinion. Like, are you listening to music the whole time? Or are you listening to music the last 6 miles? Like, do you listen to music at all on it or no?
So before I started competing at a higher level, I would always listen to music. So for McCurdy's and for the trials, you're not allowed to.
Okay.
It's technically performance enhancing.
That's right.
Medium. So you could get qualified. So I had to learn real quick how not to run with music. And it's actually easier than I shouldn't say easier. It was better than I thought it would be. I think that just the intensity of how fast you're going at that level changes the need for music because you're focusing on so many other things. And actually, I think it allowed me to focus better on my breath, which is really important when you start to feel tired. But if I could, honestly, if they allow me, I would listen to music 100%.
Yeah.
It just makes the time go by faster. I can see how it could be considered performance enhancing because I do feel, maybe it's not actually happening, but I feel like my cadence is so much more balanced and leveled when I have a song that matches it or that's pushing me just a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, lately, as I've tried to compete at higher levels, music becomes less and less available. Like I'm not allowed to listen to it.
Bobber. It is interesting though. Yeah. It's funny because like, yeah, you don't see too many people in the trail space ever listening to it unless it's like you see people like at the end of 100 miles or something like that. Like, but like anything short now. But yeah, I was just always so curious because like, I don't know, you don't actually see people ever competing at a high level in the marathon on it, but it's just so far that I was like, never know. Interesting. All right. So last question, kind of goofy. I ask everyone like a mix of either Bigfoot, aliens, or AI, just because I'm so curious to see how people think at this level. What's your take on the aliens?
Ooh, if they exist or if I would want to be one?
No, like, do they exist? Like, what do you think? Do you think they're out there? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's pretty human-centered to think that we're the only ones here. And I try to be humbled by that the universe is so much larger than any of us can imagine. And I sometimes get lost in that thought pattern a lot. We have so many different podcasts we could do. Yeah. Just the randomness of existence is something I think about a lot, and that I'm here in this moment, living this life. And if, one thing had been different, I could not be here, right? My parents had a cup of coffee or decided to get in a fight that day or whatever it was. I wouldn't be here. So the mere fact that I'm here today is a pretty lucky random thing. And for me to think that there's nothing else random or bizarre out there, I think it's a little narrow-minded. But we also have no proof. So I guess I'm open-minded about it. I'm not saying they exist, but I would also say they don't not exist.
I like it. It's a good answer. It's good. Yeah, you got me thinking there about like the randomness of reality. Like I just had a podcast the other day and we were talking about the multiverse. And I was like, man, like we could be having the same conversation like in a separate universe or like multiple times. Or you could be the host.
That conversation.
Yeah.
Yep. This conversation could have gone 7 different ways. It didn't happen because we said something else, right?
Yeah. It's true. That's crazy. Well, listen, Flannery, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to the numerous other podcasts that we'll be doing in the future for sure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And like I said, best of luck at your 2025 season. I will probably see you at Sunapee. So good luck.
Oh, great. Cool. Excited to see you there and meet you in real life.
Yeah. Thanks so much. What'd you guys think? Oh, what a great episode. I want to thank Flannery so much for coming on the podcast and telling her story and letting me help tell her story. It was an amazing conversation, and I absolutely wish her the best of luck as she takes on some big goals in 2025. It's going to be really exciting to follow along as she races at Sunapee as well as Broken Arrow and potentially multiple other races. So it's going to be super fun. Before you guys get going, hop on Instagram and you can give Flannery a follow at Flannery Davis Love on Instagram. You're also going to be able to find it in the show notes. You can just click the link and give her a follow. If you guys enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star rating and review, depending on where you're listening on this at. So it could be Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you consume your podcast. A rating and review would be amazing, so we can continue to tell the stories of these amazing athletes. Before you get going, if you're in the market for a new pack, a waist belt, any apparel, a handheld, your Ultimate Direction has you guys covered. Hop on to ultimatedirection.com and use code SteepStuffPod, and that's going to get you 25% off your cart. You can't go wrong with Ultimate Direction. Lots of good stuff on there, especially as you start to plan your spring and summer seasons. You guys are going to need those handhelds and those waist belts and your packs. So, yeah. Guys, I got a lot of great podcasts coming out this week. Lots of good conversations. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great rest of your week.